My name is Chandra Leister, and I am the Maine State Rep for the RRCA for the past years. And it has been a glorious, glorious run. I've also been the president of the Maine Track Club and a race director, and I do a number of things. And so here's a little bit about me and in picture form. As you can see, I regularly volunteer at races. Maine is cold, so we wear all the clothes. I also am, there I am in my RRCA jacket. I run, I'm a member of a number of local clubs, including Trail Monster Running. That was a snowshoe race. It looks just like mud there, but I promise there were snowshoes. And then sometimes I dress up as a turkey for the turkey trot. And I am also there in my Leia shirt, a project manager, and I work at a global veterinary diagnostics company as a project manager. Some people got a pandemic puppy, and I got a pandemic master's degree in project management. That will come up again later. I wanted to give you a little bit about where I am in the world. And so here we have the United States. I am conveniently in the state of Maine. And then if you dig deeper, I am on vacation in North Haven, which is 12 miles off the coast of Maine. I thought sometimes when you do these things, you're like, who is this talking head and where do they exist? Well, here we are. What that means is that this is where I swam today. The water was 53 degrees when I jumped off, and I don't want to talk about the seaweed that touched my legs. So what I'm going to do is talk about how to manage volunteers. We're going to go through some of the things on the smaller side, and then get into larger pieces. You're going to see some themes. You're going to see some things. The presentation is going to be shared. This is all recorded. Please leave your questions in the chat and I'll either answer them, at the end of the thing, or my email address is there as well. So when you are managing events on the smaller side, let's say in the 20-ish range, the most important pieces there is you really do want to focus on engagement and loyalty. And you can do this in a number of ways. I think that it's important to meet individually with people, one-on-one meetings, talk about what they want to do, ask questions. If you're trying to get a co-race director or fill out a small board, you want people to be passionate about their things. I was a marketing person and a project manager. And when people said, oh, we'd love you to be the marketing person on our board, I'm like, you're not listening. I don't want to do that. I do that all day. I want to show up and do timing. I want to show up and put water in cups, right? And there are people that want to extend their workday into their volunteer time, or they want to do something completely different. And so by listening and asking those questions and building that trust, sometimes you can pull things. I have a friend who's a lawyer, and she said, every board wants me to be the lawyer on their board. I don't want to be a lawyer in my free time. Just think about that. And I think the other part there is really setting some clear expectations on both sides. This is what we need you to do. This is what this is the financial arrangement, or this is the timing, or we expect you to answer emails within 48 hours. We expect you to respond to things. Having that, and you'll hear this again and again in my presentation, and not just because I have a degree a long time ago in communication, but I really feel like communication is a huge, huge part of engaging with volunteers and getting loyalty. You want them to do their job. You want them to come back and back. And then you want to give them the tools that they need to be successful. Is that a welcome packet? Is that all the bylaws? Is that the passwords and the training on how, if you're asking them to send out the emails, give them all of the tools that they need to do that. I'll also recommend having the board, if this is a board or if there's a smaller side, having some social time. Do something where you talk, yes, about the running part of the running part, but also about their lives, about their things. And you'll get people that will say, no, they don't want to do that. And that's totally fine. Allow that. but you also get to know them and connect with them. And I think that will sometimes, one, it, strengthens the relationships, and people are cool and you get to hang out with more cool people. The other thing that I always recommend is also doing a retreat. Sort of once a year, you put aside the day to day, how many people are registered for this race? Did you order enough porta potties? Who's going to pick up the cones? And go into the, what do we as an organization want to do? And this is my shameless plug, there are some excellent resources available from the RRCA about board building, all of the different board leadership, the skills, the trainings. There's a board evaluation. Highly, highly recommend that. I'm gonna move on. And so then we get to how do you scale, right? Where is the tipping point for when 20-ish people, can I manage 20 people? Not when I started, probably now, but I don't want to. My job has a rule where you should never manage more than 8 people. And I mostly agree with that. Only you can make that decision and prevent forest fires. Sorry. But only you can make that decision. And only, you can look at it and say, am I serving my volunteers or my team or my group in the way that feels good to me? And if it doesn't, maybe add in some organizational structure. You can also look at race size. Here I am at the race that I co-direct. We have 1,000 runners, and we have 2 co-directors and then sort of 3 sub people that answer emails and give feedback and stuff like that, but then show up and spend 30 hours on race day helping. And the other part is when you do that, when you go to a subcommittee standpoint, you really do want to differentiate between what's needed at each level. And you want to make it clear that the people that are doing more work or at a higher level, maybe they get a sweatshirt and everybody else gets a long sleeve shirt, or, we're runners, we feed people with shirts. But just thinking about the ways to differentiate, as well as so participants can know, I will ask this person a question, but that one gets to make decisions. And so in thinking about how you might organize a subcommittee, again, it is all dependent on where your priorities are and where your race things are and where you may think that you have needs. And I'm not going to read the slides, but race director, core, is that the answer? And I put experience on there because I really think that it's relevant if we think about the runner experience. And if there's a leader, we're all thinking about it, but if there's somebody that specifically asks these questions about every single part of it, I think that's great. And as a volunteer coordinator, I just want to put that the volunteer coordinator should be up there with them, because it is so helpful to know how everything else is going so that you can plan and understand where the volunteer needs are going to be, and where they're not going to be, but somebody thinks they are. Medical is its own thing and may have its own breakdown, with its own sub-volunteering, again, when you get into very large races. I am going to keep going because I can't see the chat, but as I mentioned, I'm a project manager. I think like a project manager. I make food shopping lists like a project manager. I run my house like a project manager. Everybody loves that. When you think about coordinating volunteers, I think about it in the various stages of this. So there's a planning and initiation stage. You identify what you're going to need and define what the scope of work is. These are different pieces that I'll cover later in additional slides. You want to explain things clearly. You're going to get to implementation and execution. How do you get people? Where do they go? How do you think about them? When do you talk about them? How do you get them to show up? How do you get them to sign up for next year? There's also the monitoring control stage. This is during the event. Be reachable during event. You may want to hide in your car and put on dry socks, but this is not the time. I mean that in the silly way. Yes, you should put on dry socks. You have to put your oxygen mask on first before you can take care of other people. And then I think the other part there is crisis notifications. You need to be able to know how to get to people if you need to in an emergency. And then in a closure, status. You want to say thank you. You want to promote loyalty. You want to think about if they are, I use the phrase here, convert and keep. You want to think about if they were a great volunteer, do you think they maybe want to leave? If they were great at handing out t-shirts and they had a lot of customer service, and you know that person's going to retire next year, could they become the new organized sub chair of that? So first is, how do you identify what you need for the race? Here I am with a group of registration race day packet pickup volunteers. And so thinking about, you need to ask everybody. You need to not be afraid and think about the race from start to finish, from concept to everybody sharing their images later. You want to ask the race director. You want to ask medical. How many people do you need? Where do they need to go? You need to ask enough questions for them to think about. Ideally, they're already thinking about it, and that is how they have become the directors of those departments. But don't be afraid. Coordinating a lot of volunteers or coordinating any volunteers, it's important to be curious, think about the runner experience, think about races that you've been to, that you've experienced, that you've volunteered at, and bring that. You need to identify how many race meetings you might need. If there's going to do a runner survey, are you going to ask, right? You can also look at other events. Go to an RRCA convention, the website, your state rep, think about key stakeholders. I always ask a group of running friends, that participate in a whole bunch of races. Hey, what did you like about that? Or what didn't you like? I know that some race directors I always like, I'll find a friend that's running the race and I'll say, hey, I know that you're injured and you're just gonna have a good time at this one. Could you pick it apart for me and let me know afterwards? Because I'm not able to run the race, but I want the feedback. And that way you can say, this intersection really felt dangerous to me. Or the other bit there is asking past volunteers. Did you feel like you had enough people at your spot? Did you feel like, you had the information that you wanted? The other part when thinking about recruiting and what you need is that it is for everyone. And that should be one of the first things that you do. And I may say that should be one of the first things you do to everything. But look at your event, look at your website, look at your social media, look for the kind of porta potties. Look if they're up on a step. Look if you didn't get any porta potties that are handicap accessible. Look if your language is gendered. Look if somebody that, is your course confusing for a sighted, for different levels of sighted ability. Use descriptions to fully explain the position. Does it require sitting or standing? Does it require walking? Will they have to carry? Does it require sitting up and sitting down? Do they have to look at small print as part of their volunteer? Thinking about all of those things and explaining them at the beginning really does a great job to make sure that people will find something that works for them. Also thinking about, are there any age requirements? I try not to have anybody 18 or below 18 in an intersection. Obviously not at a beer tent and never in parking. So, there are, under 18 is great for water stops or shirts or different things like that, but maybe not be good for a multi-car intersection. And then thinking about, and I mentioned this a little bit, but going through all of these different things to make sure that people will be set up for volunteer success. My dad volunteers at some of my races and he can't hear any of the announcements that people make over loudspeakers. So I make sure to give him a job that he does not need to do. He does not need to hear things for, we have a few volunteers that have to follow elites around for drug testing. That includes, sometimes going like into the porta potty with them. So that is a thing that you need to identify. I go back and forth between, does managing volunteers mean recruiting volunteers? And when I am managing a large group of volunteers, when I do it for the TD Beach to Beacon 10K road race, here you can see our t-shirt crew. I I
Okay.
do my best to say all of my volunteer coordinators are in charge of recruiting, and the marketing part of the race is in charge of recruiting. And I try to avoid it, although I am constantly always be recruiting. And I am sometimes, I mean, I got interviewed by two news stations and a radio station in the past week because the TD Beach to Beacon is coming up in a week and a half. If you're in Maine and would like to volunteer, August 3rd, let me know. But there are ways to, to recruit. There are also a variety of ways to continue to recruit volunteers through community partnerships, through sponsor relationships, I mean, past volunteers is a key one, paid media, local TV. There are so many things that cover volunteer recruitment, and I am not going to go super in depth about it, although I'm happy to answer questions about what I've seen work or not work in the past. Then you want to think about the information that you need when people are signing up. And so that may be everything from a size for a giveaway. What size head? Do they like a small hat or a big hat? You need their information. You need emergency contact name and phone number. I had a volunteer have a medical emergency recently, and I very quickly had to find their family and, deal with a whole lot of things. And so having access to that is really helpful. Sometimes it's really helpful to know who their employer is, if only because if you see a trend, you may be able to reach out to that employer and say, hey, do you want to post this in your intranet? That would be really cool. And then make sure you want to have people sign waivers so that you can take a whole bunch of pictures and use them later in our CA presentations. And you also want a place where the volunteers that are signing up can leave you notes. I really need to be with so and so. I have to leave at 4 p.m. I can only lift boxes, but only to 3 feet, so on and so forth. And then from a loyalty perspective, it's great. Like, how many years have you been volunteering? I've got the TD Beach to Beacon 10K road race, which I will always use that phrase for, has been going. This is our 26th running, and I have volunteers that have run for all 26 years, legacy volunteers, or not run, volunteered at the race. And our previous volunteer coordinator, absolutely amazing woman, taught me a lot, and she started that, and I love to see that happen. Another thing I like to ask sometimes is a goal for the event. What do you want to see, or what do you want to do? And then, maybe a fun thing. What's your favorite YouTube video to watch? Where's your favorite lobster roll? Again, I live in Maine. So then you want to think about how you're organizing your volunteers. There's a variety of online platforms. I mostly use Volunteer Local and Run Sign Up. This is not a commercial for any of those, and but what I tried to do was think about how you can, like, you need to think about what you need your platform to do, and then you can identify which platform is right for you and your race. Because for a race that I organize that has, 300 runners, I'm doing that where, I mean, I only have like 15 volunteers. I'm doing that on a Google spreadsheet. The Beach to Beacon has 900 volunteer slots over a week. I'm using a much more robust system for that. The Midwinter Classic has 120 volunteers. I'm using Run Sign Up for that. So you can sort of make those decisions and think about, are there a number of coordinators? Do you have a number of users? How easily can you reset and send your coordinators instructions? Because they only use it once a year and they do not remember. And you can't expect them to remember, and there are no stupid questions. And then if it has an email system, can you automatically email from it, or do you need to use something like MailChimp to connect to? Does it have text notifications? We had a thunderstorm situation where we needed to alert all of our volunteers to seek shelter, and our volunteer platform had some text notifications that we were able to use. And then thinking about the ease of moving people around. 10 days out from race day, and I can tell you my inbox is filled with, I can't do it this way, but I can show up here. And how about this? And can you move me over to here? And, I didn't know where to sign up, but I'm supposed to be here. And the other part there is, can volunteers go in and self-serve so that they don't I love all of them and I'm glad to answer their emails, but I got a lot of emails and I would much rather people be able to go in and self-serve. And then being able to say, can you track rewards? Can you track cancellations? Can it integrate into your race site? And then what kind of dashboard? Are you technically minded and that's how you want to see everything? Or how deep do you want to go down that rabbit hole? And you need to ask yourself, and be honest, because if it has so many features that you get confused and you don't need them, then you don't need those features. Don't do it. And then you want to communicate with volunteers. And I like to think about it from a calendar standpoint. So when they sign up to volunteer, you've got a confirmation. Thank you. We're super excited. This is race day. Here's a few things you might need to know. 1 month out, you're in there. We're still looking for people. Can you help us spread the word? 1 week out, a volunteer guide. This is a key part of my stressed communication. Don't expect them to know anything. They might, but they might forget it and they might just want to hear it from your voice of authority. So explain it. Tell them where to go, where to park, that they should bring their cell phones charged, that they should bring sunblock, that they should bring a hat, that they should go here, and then after that, drop their flag and vest off here. The day before the event happens, I resend the volunteer, I send an email that says, you should be here at this time. Please read the guide I sent last week. It's attached. And hey, you should absolutely bring your cell phone. And the day after, I always send something. Sometimes it's 2 days until I wake up, but I will say, thank you, and mean it. Tell us how it was and what we can do to improve. And this is where I think you can really get some feedback. Were there enough people at your slot? Did you run out of small shirt sizes? Did you really need more pins? Was somebody mean to you that you want me to yell at? Those different things. And depending on the race and your budget and your plan and your desires, a celebration invite. Is there a volunteer party? One race that I work on, we do a partnership with a local AAA baseball affiliate. I'm sorry, I'm a member of Red Sox Nation. I'm proud. But the Portland Sea Dogs does a Maine marathon night. I probably just lost participants. The Portland Sea Dogs does a celebration, a Maine marathon night, and we give a ticket to all of the volunteers that help at the Maine marathon, and it's fun. And then I wanted to go sort of deeply into the volunteer guide. I'm not going to cover this. I just sort of covered a lot of it, but just so that it was in writing, so that you would have it for later if you ever look at the slides again. And then I put in an example of mine, so that you can copy, paste, rewrite, look at. Our race is the first Sunday in February in Maine, and it is cold and sometimes on Groundhog's Day. So you'll see a number of pieces with links and things like that. And again, this is all sort of for handouts later. One item that I want to say while I'm still on this slide is, when you send out volunteer communication and you say normally email at an 11 font, bump that up. Bump that up to a 12 or a 14 because it makes everybody's life easier. One of the things that I get feedback on all of the time is, I very much appreciate how big the font is in your emails. I don't really understand, but that's my tip. This is Blaine, previous Maine State RRCA rep and then Eastern Region rep, and also a co-director of mine for the Midwinter Classic. Safety is an important part of managing volunteers, and it's everybody's job. So you want to think about putting people in appropriate clothing. That means your town may be using OSHA green. They may be using safety orange. It is an important part of your conversation with your local law enforcement to identify which color they want you to use. I had a bad experience about this, and now I stress it. We had 100 orange vests and put everybody out in orange, and the police told me about 10 minutes before the race that really everybody should be in the OSHA green. We bought many, many OSHA green vests after the race. Then thinking also about safety. If you're sending people out to remote locations, don't send them out alone. Um, Tell everybody that is volunteering in traffic that they should, be looking at the traffic, but also looking at the runner. None of those things should be looking at their cell phones over and over and over again. And the other piece there is that I think you can really, I don't want to say leverage your volunteers, but you can use them as the eyes and the ears on the course to see if they have any safety concerns that you can address at a later date. I'm going through this fast so that is some time for questions. I want to stress that everybody needs to remember fun. People volunteer, they give you their time so graciously and so wonderfully to make an event happen because they care about the profit and the nonprofit, because they care about the event, because their brother is running, because like everybody has a story, but they're there to have a good time and not get yelled at and not be negative. And so it's so I think it's important to spice that, to add that fun in, to add that pleasantness, to lead with gratitude in these areas, because I think that's really important for loyalty, for engagement, for keeping people, for converting them, for having a good time. I mean, we're all doing this on our free time, and I think it's important that it doesn't always feel like work. Unless you do this for a job, at which point it should feel like both, right? And so then you're looking at the closure. You want to say thank you. You want to say thank you when they show up. You want to start and end every email with thank you for your time. Thank you for your, and I think being specific with your thanks is also really nice, and I think helps humanize you and them. Thanks. It's great and it's wonderful, but there's more of an opportunity to be specific and to really have them feel appreciated. And so I did mention something where we think about how we could promote loyalty for repeat events. Are there a few people that you had some good experiences with that you may want to ask for some more feedback? Is the event next year? Every year, our race is August 3rd. On August 4th or 5th, I'm going to send an email to all 900 volunteers, say, thank you so much for all of your efforts. Volunteer registration for our 2026, next year's 25, 2025 race opens May 1st. See you then. And I think, and say, if you're interested in being more involved, reach out. We can talk about it. We can make it happen. I can use you in all of the glorious ways. And another piece of project management that I pull in here is the continuous improvement thought. And what I try to do is reach out to the different organizing committee members, or the different co-chairs or the different deputy directors, or whatever title you have in your org chart, and say, what worked? Let's talk about what actually worked, because we can have successes without saying all of these things went wrong. And then you say, okay, what didn't work? What should we stop doing? The continuous improvement is, what should we start? What should we stop? What should we continue? And thinking about that and having those honest questions. And sometimes it's helpful to have somebody unbiased come in and ask those questions so that you can have a larger conversation. I have said this many times, but it is relevant. Again, say thank you in a variety of ways. And so we have the TD Beach to Beacon here, co-founded by Joni Benoit Samuelson, who is celebrating her 40th anniversary of her gold medal in 1984. Very excited. But she is our race founder, and she is very present throughout the race. And we have a volunteer dinner, and we give out a Volunteer of the Year award. And that year, it went to two glorious continuous volunteers. And it was a joy to be able to present that, to be able to say thank you to Don and Carol for all of their work. And we do that every year. I like paper thank you notes. I send paper thank you notes to some key volunteers, because I think that everybody gets an email or a text. There are ways that you can stand out. An experience we talked about, phone calls, always great. I saw one race that published a week after the event, a newspaper article that listed all of the times, but then listed the names of every single one of their volunteers. And I just thought that was amazing. And that also helps with recruiting, because when you see that, it's a sly way, but when people see that you care about the volunteers, then they are more likely to, I think, sign up, or you get a good reputation, your race gets a good reputation, and everybody wins. I think it's also really important to request feedback and to be open to the feedback and to recognize that it may feel like a personal attack, but it is not. Sometimes it is, and you have to dismiss those people. And I think there are different ways to handle negative comments or frustrated people or things like that. I'm digressing just a minute. I always, when I introduce myself or when I train a group of volunteers, I always, hi, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate your time. You're here today to give out bibs. This is how you do that. This is whatever. These are the questions they might ask. If anybody gives you a problem, I'll be standing over there, send them to me. If anybody gives you a problem, these are the three people, right? Or just make a note or let us know, because my friendly volunteers are not here to get yelled at. I am, and I will take it, and I am ready for it. And so anyway, that was my digression. But I think it is relevant to request feedback from your volunteers, even has a question on the post-run runner survey, and you can work with the race director to do that if you're not also the race director. I talked so fast, but am going to say thank you so much. Here I am at the finish line of the TD Beach to Beacon 10K road race. A few years ago, you too could volunteer if you happen to be in Maine on August 3rd. Andy, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to leave my screen up for just a second.
Sure. Yeah, that's
So that
fine.
people see the
So,
email, but
and actually, I want to take a note from what you shared, and I will note that this is a volunteer presentation today. That Chandra is doing this 10 days before a major race and in a strictly volunteer role. So we, from the RSA and all of us, thank you for doing this and for offering this wonderful presentation. As I noted, this is really a nice chance for the whole RSA community to kind of connect and come together. So thank you for sharing your knowledge. So questions, the chat was mostly kind of talking amongst participants, but do you find that most clubs have volunteer coordinators for the race or event, or is it a committee of volunteer coordinators? Kind of what's been your experience with sort of how this position is divvied up among events or clubs or such?
Sorry, Andy, if you want, I can clarify. I thought I
Yes,
unmuted.
please, sure.
Yeah, so it's something here, our club in Dayton, Ohio, and I'll put myself on camera too if that helps. We're kind of in the process of thinking about, and I know it's different by club size and whatever, but we're in the process of thinking, do we keep doing things as a per race basis, meaning every race? Sorry,
no, that's
I'm
fine.
not sure.
I
Okay.
think you're talking about scaling, right? Does it make sense
Yeah.
to do it per race or to do it sort of at a higher committee level?
Correct, because the board is considering, do we have a committee that, whenever a race needs volunteers, they go to the committee and say, hey, help us get volunteers. And that committee gets them volunteers. Or is the race then responsible for getting volunteers? And obviously, some of our races are small, 50, 100 people races. Some are 2 to 3 to more thousand. So, just wanted to get your thoughts. How are most clubs doing it? And what's your recommendation?
Hi, Peter. Nice to see you not at convention. I think my response would be, I think everybody should be recruiting. I think that it's really difficult when you put a recruiting task on a few people and ask them to recruit over and over again for multiple events throughout the year. I think that is hard, and you're going to have a hard time finding somebody or recruiting for that position. Having thinking about, you know, in your club, so the main track club, right? So we have 6 races per year, and we ask all of our members to volunteer at 3 races per year, because we figure if we can get every member to volunteer at 3 races, then we can recruit some non-members, then we'll be good with numbers. Does that work? Sometimes, you sort of get the same 30% of people that volunteer at all 6. So then we started an award, like we have a Grand Prix series where if you run all of the races, you get entered into something. But we also started sort of like a Grand Prix for volunteers. If you volunteer at all of the races, you get a special something. And so that is also, you know, loyalty and continued involvement. Having a committee in your club that is focused on loyalty or on marketing and volunteer recruitment, you know, and membership, then maybe that all fits together. But I'm glad for other people to chime in the chat. It looks like somebody else said that they have a committee. The core team has to show up, but the quality of race will be the same. Yeah. And then I think, and you get to that point where you're like, okay, can we expect that of volunteers, or do we need to look at stipends, or do we need to look at, you know, something else?
Great question, Peter. Thank you. So we also had, and forgive me if I don't say this correctly, but Bishwas had a question about recruitment. So Bishwas, if you're here and want to unmute and ask, by all means, go ahead.
Oh, hi there. Yeah, thank you so much. I think you started answering that in your last answer, but I just all kinds of any ideas for recruiting volunteers, like any additional ideas that you have, but you did touch on it in
I
your last
mean,
answer.
there's so many different ways, right? I mean, like going to I find that I do my best recruiting when I volunteer at other races, because I am a visible presence in Maine at the running events, you know, which is sometimes great because I show up and I'm like, all right, give me a job, and they give me a job and I'm like, can I have a less complicated job? Like, you know, or I show up and I say, you know, do whatever, because then I'm visible at the runs. I'm an extrovert, can you tell? I talk to the people that I'm there with. I talk to the volunteer groups. And say, oh yeah, I am also a race director. Here's my race. Shameless self-promotion, I think, is the always be recruiting. There's the other bits which I didn't get into, but we do a bit of, is the Maine Marathon, for example. We have a number of nonprofit partner relations. The Maine Marathon donates all of its proceeds. I don't know what the asterisk there is, but to nonprofits. And so we have 13 water stops, and there is a nonprofit organization at each of those water stops, and they receive a donation from the Maine Marathon for that, and that keeps them coming back year after year. And then, you know, we've had some school groups, you know, like there's a high school robotics team that I recruited to volunteer at one of my water stops, and another high school robotics team was like, hey, I hear this team does this, like, how come I can't? So we brought in another team at a food station, and, you know, we've sort of been doing that as well. So I think some of those bits require you to put out some money. But I think that's putting out money into the community in a race where you're taking up community space. So maybe you feel okay about that.
That's great. Thank you so much.
I feel like I'm just ranting, but I'm.
Stephanie had a question about awards. And so Stephanie, if you would like to unmute and ask, go ahead.
Hi, Chandra. I so missed you this
Hi,
past
Stephanie.
May. It's so good to see you. Yeah, so I'm always dealing with, you just mentioned stipends for volunteers, and I constantly deal with the blurring of the line of paying a volunteer and when do they actually, are they staff, right? So
yeah,
it's that slippery slope.
I use the phrase consultant, because they're not race staff, right? You're hiring them to do a specific thing. You're giving them X amount of money, and you've got sort of like, I mean, it's like a contract kind of paperwork basis, right? And that sort of from a volunteer leader kind of standpoint. When you get into, and I mean, we've had these conversations for years, right? When does a race get to a point where you should pay a race director? When does it get to a point where, how do you balance that when the possibility of, if you have 20 coordinators and one of them gets paid, but not everybody knows that one gets paid, like, it's ugly. And so you get into that part of, you know, at a race director level, we can't find somebody for this. And you're public about that, right? You're public about it being a problem. You're public about it not working in the way that it is. And you go to the committee and you're like, look, this is like, we have some real concerns about this happening, or this is going to cause a safety issue, or this is going to. And I think I'm an over communicator. And this is where I think communicating and being open and honest and having that level of sort of trust and communication with the team does that. I'm not saying it's not going to blow up in your face. It completely, absolutely could. And you get to that point where you're like, all right, well, then we're not going to pay anybody. And maybe the race, maybe we're gonna cap the race. Maybe we can't, if we're at 5,000 runners, we can't move to 7,000 without doing this thing. Or we need to pay this person. What can we do to pay everybody, or what can we do to pay everybody a small amount? I think if I had all of these answers, then I would get paid for doing this kind of stuff.
No, I appreciate the time. Thank you. You've actually caused me to think more.
Great. So Amelie has a question, which is, how do you approach / reach youth groups like cross-country teams, honor societies, etc.? Do you offer donations to the club? What are good incentives for school groups?
I Google stalk people, hardcore. I go down the rabbit hole of the State Principals Association, to find the athletic director at a school, to call them, to ask who is the coach. I ask my volunteers, I ask my race friends, I ask my running friends, I ask the community, I ask my Facebook groups. I am publicly asking questions like that all the time. I think it, if you're not plugged into the network, then cold calling, it works. It doesn't feel like it should work, but everybody's afraid of the phone. Like, everybody texts now or emails, but just like, if you pick up the phone, somebody answers, they're like, what? And then they help you. It's kind of amazing. But like, don't call me. No, I'm kidding. I think we offer donations to the different school groups. And the amount goes basically up depending on how many years they've been doing it. Can they regularly, like, they have to bring 30 people. If they bring 15 people, that's not what I asked for, right? Like, they did the job and they hustled for it, but I'm going to really think about it. I'm going to pay them. Like, they brought 30 people because, they did the thing and I made a promise. But then maybe next year I'm not going to bring them back and I'm going to bring in another organization. And I think the amount of money, I would like to imagine that it is the same across the country, but I have noticed very, very different prices in different places. And so, we start with like $300 for a nonprofit. And if there's a college hockey team that gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning, picks up a mile or two of cones, drops them all out, stands there, picks them all up at the end, we give them more. You know what I mean? Like, I think you're spending 4 hours at a volunteer, at a water stop. That's different than hard manual labor for 15 hours. I'm not saying that water stops are not hard manual labor. I appreciate all of the effort and all of the things. I know this is being recorded and will come back to haunt me later.
I actually have a question if there's nothing else in the chat right now, which is just about communication. And it sounds like email is the primary format you use to communicate. Do you find that you need to text some groups, or that is there a generational component to that, or is email really sort of what you primarily find successful? Yeah.
I set the expectation, one, I make everybody register as a volunteer because they need to sign the waiver. Let me say that again for the people. You need to have everybody register as a volunteer so they sign the waiver. Once you do that, I say to them, you're going to receive on that page where they have to sign up, you're going to receive email communication. Please give a good email to reach yourself. Please make sure, and then the system that I use automatically sends out an email that says, thank you for registering for a volunteer. I am the one that will be sending you emails. If you don't hear from your coordinator, let me know. If you have any questions, do this thing. We also have, again, this is for the race with 900 volunteers. We have a private Facebook group. And people will apply to be in the Facebook group, and I cross-check, I manage that, and I cross-check, I help manage it, the people against the registered volunteers. And then, so we've got, 900 volunteer slots, and we've had the Facebook group for like 10 years. It's become a great recruiting place. It's become a great place for sharing pictures of the race, and for, so you've got people that can't. I just got an email from a woman who's volunteered for 15 years, and she's like, I'm so sorry I can't be there. My chemo is that morning, but I could probably volunteer in the afternoon. And I was like, thank you. Please take the day off, but I love your loyalty. Like, take care of you first, and that kind of bit where email, to answer your question, we mostly email. There are some coordinators where I have to download lists for them and send them because they do not understand how. There are some coordinators that will only text me, and I only email them back. Because I'm not going to attach an Excel list to a text, but I will answer their questions, that kind of thing. And then on starting at about race evening or race eve, I set my Gmail account to automatic replies that say, I'm not going to read your email until after the race. Send me a text. Use your name. Because I get all these texts that are like, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to be. And I'm like, I don't know who you are. And, it goes back and forth. Waivers, I saw that in the chat too.
Yeah, right.
We have a lawyer on our board who does a new waiver every year. We upload it as part of the volunteer registration. If you sign up to volunteer at the TD Beach to Beacon, you will receive the waiver. I will continue my shameless plugs until I reach 900. We have electronic waivers that sign it. And then if they're signing up for a minor, then we have a different form that they download and email me, and I save them in a file in my Gmail for 2 years. And then we also have a PO box where they can print them out and mail them. And we still get people that do that as well. From a no-show, the question in the chat is, how many no-show volunteers do you get out of 900? I would say it started about 2 days ago, where people are like, I all of a sudden realized that I will not be doing that. And so I say, great, can you find me a replacement? I mean, because maybe they can, right? Because I'm trying to manage the coordinators, or sometimes I'll CC their coordinator and be like, here, please deal with this, because I'm learning to delegate in my old age. Out of the 900, I would say 20 have sick dogs that all of a sudden have to go to an emergency vet. That is the most common reason that I get for people not volunteering on race day, which I think is that irony, since I work for a veterinary diagnostic company, or like maybe they just don't know that I do that. Anyway, I always think that's funny. Not funny, and I don't want any of the puppies and kittens to be sick. I wheel and deal is really the answer. I very quickly go in, I cancel them out so we know they're not coming. I ask them if they can help find a replacement. I let the coordinator know that they're not going to come, so maybe they can call in their cousin's ex something. I look at what else is volunteered. I sent an email today to a co-coordinator that was like, hey, I see you have 40 people and probably only need 20. Can I have 10 of them to move over to this other section? We'll negotiate for that. Maybe he's on the call. And so when people cancel on race day, then you triage. And that's really, I think, all you can do, right? Okay, great. Do you know what you were supposed to volunteer for? Okay. And then you either call the coordinator and you chat and you say, can you do without this person? And if they can't, then you call the coordinators until you find somebody that they can do without. that they have, you know, and you transfer a person. And sometimes that means that you have to shut down, you know, that the info table doesn't stay open for the last 30 minutes, or that it's just one person, or that I mean, I feel like the waves of no-shows have changed back and forth pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and I'm not 100% sure where it's going to be this year. I don't get that many no-shows. I would say, and I don't know how many because I don't have everybody sort of tell me and cancel. I would say probably 20 people no show. Um, across, you know, across all of the different slots. You know, and if they're one of the key medical volunteers, that's a much larger problem than if they are at a water stop with 35 people. I also have, I have a list of where most needed. I have a bucket that I ask people to sign up for where most needed. Like they don't know and they'll say, I'll just help you. And I'll call them. You know, I mean, they're all, you know, I'll assign them with a week out to where they're most needed, but then I also usually keep 2 or 3 in my back pocket. Or I'll assign them to myself at the information tent, and then I'll call them and be like, okay, I need you to do this. You know, and I think that's a part of, I've been doing this for a while and I have those people, or I have, you know, I have the relationships where I can call somebody to be like, I'm in this bind. I need somebody to follow 2 elite athletes around until they pee so we can make sure that they're, you know, not doing drugs. Can you just do that for me this one time? And I will stand on a road for you for 6 hours in October. I talked for a long time, Andy, and it's 9 o'clock in
No,
Maine.
yeah.
It's gotten
Maybe
very
let's
late.
have, Sandy had a question in the chat.
Oh,
Maybe
I'm
we'll,
ready.
yeah, as the last one for, well, you know, we can keep rolling as long as they're, but recommended way to address volunteers who do not follow instructions or rules. A pacer who wears headphones, course monitors on their phones.
I I I confront them. If I see it, then I confront them and I say, hello, thank you for volunteering. I need you to do this thing. I need you to not do this thing. Please. If that doesn't work for you, then tell me, because maybe this isn't the right volunteer slot for you. I really need you to do this. And I think that's the part. And I think you also have to recognize that even though you've explained it, and even though you've emailed it, and even though you've reminded people, and even though that they don't know, they don't care, they got 100 gajillion other things going on. And I think there's that deep breath and patience before you explain your rage to, like, you have one thing to do, take your headphones. I know that is not a very popular answer, but I do sometimes have to. This one of these races, I've got this wonderful group of people, but like every year there's this one person that's always on the phone. I'm like, no. Then what I do is I know they're going to come back and I know they're going to do it. I give them jobs that don't give them enough time to look. Keep them busy, right?
Any other questions well, great. Well, Chandra, again, thank you so much. I will give one final note, which is that this originally was presented as we indicated at our annual convention earlier this year. So if you weren't there and you enjoyed this presentation and this subsequent discussion, please consider coming to our convention. This is kind of what it's all about, not only the wonderful education content, but the community of fellow grassroots, community-based running enthusiasts, people like you.